But we seem to have more of those folks who are saying, let me just get that second passport, let me get that insurance policy. I had a couple people say, I think spending $100,000 on a citizenship as an American is a waste of money. But I'm thinking it's better than stockpiling food or guns or whatever else that I might stockpile. Now, obviously, we don't entirely focus on investment immigration. We have all kinds of other programs that are residence-based or real estate-based, whatever. So I think we're seeing a growing number of people in that camp who are saying, let me get an insurance policy. And what I always say about that is you're insuring against the psycho lover who one time punched you in the face and now you're afraid they might stab you in the neck with a knife. You want to make sure that you're not around to get stabbed in the neck.
Fantastic. So I wanted to start, obviously what's on everybody's mind in the investment migration industry recently is COVID-19 and what it's ultimately going to do to the market. Is it going to destroy the purchasing power of the mass affluent, or is it going to lead in the long run to an increase and a boost in demand for these types of products? And so let's start by talking about the money printing that's going on right now in just about every Western world country. Central banks printing money like it's going out of style, which in a sense it is, considering the rise of cryptocurrencies, and maybe we'll have to go back to commodity currencies after all this zero interest rate policies for the last 10, 15 years. Somebody's going to have to pick up the tab for that. That can happen through increased taxes, but more commonly it happens through devaluation or inflation of the money supply and a devaluation of the currency. You talk to a lot of investors, entrepreneurs, especially in the United States, in the West in general, and I want to sort of get a feel from you. What is it that you're hearing from these entrepreneurs and investors? Are they concerned about currency devaluation, inflation, increased and maybe punitive taxes on the people who have money? And is that driving them to look more closely into things like second citizenship and residency by investment?
I look at these things, and thanks for having me. I look at these things as a shock to the system. You have politicians who are increasingly in favor, who are looking for reasons, excuses in order to raise taxes. Tax the rich has been a growing thing for a while now. You have politicians in the West who say, why are people working for an income? Why don't we just give them the money? Who say, don't go back to work after this is all over. We have entire groups of people in the political class who they just want to go from one bout of shaming people over something to the next. And so I always think that these things are convenient excuses. If you wanted more government control over security, then 9/11 was your excuse. And so I think this will be yet another in a long line of excuses to raise taxes, more government control. And what happens after 9/11? What happens after this? They go out and they don't really think about what it costs. I mean, go back to the mid-2000s when they started prosecuting people for fraud, for ripping off the Department of Defense and all the other agencies in the U.S. because they were just handing out money to anyone who could get things going because it was a national unity thing. And then only later was it, we get ripped off. Right now, they're getting ripped off and they're handing money out to people. Now, I think the small business owner is going to be the one who gets screwed in a lot of these countries because in the U.S., for example, here's your grant, but it's actually a loan. And now the government controls you if you want to get your loan forgiven. But I don't think these things are, now we should do something about it. It's just fuel for what they already wanted to do. And so what I'm seeing is, entrepreneurs are coming. They want to have a plan B. What I'm also seeing is wealthy people. We've always worked with wealthier, ultra high net worth individuals as well as, active entrepreneurs. But we seem to have more of those folks who are saying, let me just get that second passport. Let me get that insurance policy. I had a couple people say, I think spending $100,000 on a citizenship as an American is a waste of money. But, I'm thinking it's better than stockpiling food or guns or whatever else that I might stockpile. Now, obviously, we don't entirely focus on investment immigration. We have all kinds of other programs that are residence-based or real estate-based, whatever. So I think we're seeing a growing number of people in that camp who are saying, let me get an insurance policy. And what I always say about that is you're insuring against the psycho lover who one time punched you in the face and now you're afraid they might stab you in the neck with a knife. You want to make sure that you're not around to get stabbed in the neck.
Fantastic. It's a great analogy because obviously some people have been burned in the past and they're wondering, okay, what's around the corner? What's next? And if history has taught us anything, it's that don't put anything past these guys. About this, you talk about the small businesses are the ones getting screwed. Obviously, they can't afford lobbyists, right? So they can't get those same handouts that, say, Walmart or an airline can get. And so, if we're talking about, in the medium term, obviously, how is this going to affect demand? How is it going to affect the purchasing power of the people who are seen as let's say the mass affluent, who have been representing the bulk of applications to the programs on the lower end of the price scale, the citizenship programs, for example, in the Caribbean.
Right.
They were affordable to the mass affluent. Some people are saying, Mohammed Asari of Range Developments, for example, have said, now we're going to return to the realm of the ultra high net worth individuals because the mass affluent have been wiped out. What do you think of that theory? Is it the case that, in a crisis like this, the mass affluent get wiped out? Or will we see wealth merely being transferred elsewhere, as tends to happen in these crises?
Yeah, I do think that'll be the case. Wealth does get transferred. Look at the great financial crisis. You had people who became billionaires who went through that. You had people who were buying real estate at 10 cents on the dollar. I don't think, from what I've seen around the world, there haven't been opportunities to be buying real estate for 10 or 30 or even 50 cents on the dollar. Maybe that's coming. I am a bit more optimistic than some folks that humanity adapts and we move on. What I think the biggest issue is, and I'm not super experienced in the Chinese space, which makes up obviously the bulk of the investment migration space, but what I can tell you about people in the West is the mass affluent, many of them there, including the entrepreneurs, they're running their business on borrowed money. A lot of what they have is borrowed. And even though they may run their own business, they're really not entirely different in some cases to the person who works paycheck to paycheck. And if they can't get a paycheck this week, then they're out on the street. And so to me, those are the people that are going to be challenged. And that's going to be the problem. I think that there are plenty of people, it's going to be a bit of a reset. I think there are plenty of people out there who have stockpiled cash. And I think those people are saying, I'm looking at a situation where just in the last week or so, my dollars against the euro and so many other currencies are down, 3 or 4%. Why don't I put this money into a citizenship? Or why don't I take advantage of a currency that got beaten up and buy some real estate there, have a place I can go, get a passport either now or in the next couple of years. So I do think wealth will be transferred. I do certainly think people who've been living on credit or who have been running businesses that are unsustainable are going to have an issue. But that's one thing I've been talking about for a while now, is the hustler versus the builder. I wouldn't say you're going to go to the ultra high net worth individuals. I would say you're going to go to the builders. Okay, nothing wrong with building a business and making a whack of cash for 3 years and then getting out. Those people are the ones that have come to us for tax advice because they just suddenly found themselves making $3 million a year and they don't want to give half of it away. But then, later, a year or two later, sometimes you'll hear those guys and the business fell apart. It wasn't really a sustainable business. I think people who are doing things sustainably will continue to do things sustainably and are now looking and saying, not only with COVID, but also in the U.S. with riots, saying, maybe this Nomad Capitalist guy, maybe, Christian, maybe they're right. Maybe I should take some of my money and this is part of my building. That's why I call it citizenship insurance. No one likes to buy insurance. Who wants to buy insurance? You can buy car insurance, health insurance. I got to pay my life insurance bill coming up in a couple of weeks. I don't want to pay a life insurance bill, but when you need it, you'll be glad you paid it. And so I think that's the demarcation that I would put it in versus only the uber wealthy now.
Talking about unsustainable businesses that are funded by debt, price to earnings ratios on the major stock exchanges in the United States are at extremely high levels now. Leverage is at extremely high levels. I think officially now let's say that the prices of equities, public equities, are now officially divorced from the real economy. And that obviously has a lot to do with the quantitative easing, or mostly to do with quantitative easing. The Fed has been essentially printing all this free money. Now there's helicopter money. That hasn't led to increases in consumer prices because the U.S. dollar is still the world's reserve currency, but it has inflated significantly over the last decade the prices of publicly traded equities. Do you think that, with this in mind, that the worst of the financial losses are still ahead of us?
I'm not a market prognosticator. My position, I had a friend. He's a libertarian economist, and he says, we were talking about this, and I said, how many folks who are libertarians who believe that you're going to see a huge reversal and you're going to go and see another drop? He said, I try and tell these guys that even though the end of the story ends very badly, doesn't mean every chapter ends with a murder. And I thought that was very interesting. I'm not in the doom and gloom game. Now, I think maybe some folks in the investment immigration game they need to be a bit more in the doom and gloom industry where, there's no assurances the European Union lasts through your grandchildren's lifetime. There's no assurance that this visa-free travel never changes. I think there's a lot of hype in this kind of fast food marketing, as I call it, from some folks in the investment immigration business, where there's nothing original. It's just, hey, here's 6 programs we sell. Which one do you want? This island's nicer. Okay, great. EU. No, I think there's a little bit of disingenuousness. But, for me to say that, everything's going to hell in a handbasket, I'm not in that camp. What I do think is, if you're betting on, the United States staying where it's at as your entire strategy, that's a problem. And so I think that my strategy is more of be diversified, because I do think the things you're talking about are going to be an issue. I don't know if they're an issue 6 months from now, but I think being diversified is going to be important.
Let's talk a little bit about which programs are eventually going to sail up as the winners or the relative winners after COVID-19, because obviously the pandemic has laid bare the fact that a passport isn't necessarily, or a citizenship in a tiny island nation isn't necessarily what you need during times of crisis. First of all, maybe you can't even get to that country due to the closed flights. Also, is that a place where you could see yourself staying for a longer period? Many observers on IMI have theorized that probably what's going to happen is that the programs that the investment migration programs that grant access to larger physical territories like the United States or the European Union, and also those larger economic blocks, that those will be favored going forward compared to the small country CIPs, which after all only really grant you mobility. Do you think there's some sense in that theory?
Well, I've said I think having 2 second passports is not a bad idea if one of them is a CIP. A lot of times you see someone, they want to expatriate from the United States, they just want to get something going quickly, and that's a good option. Just whatever you need it for, quickly get the CIP. And then go and get something else that's a bit more of what I would call a landed country, so that way you can have both. My perspective is different, again, than a lot of folks in the immigration industry, because I am talking to Westerners who are a bit contrarian, and they're more motivated by tax. I look at a lot of the people who I think are buying these programs. If you come from China, where up until recently you can just skate away from the tax man, you're not really going to think that the IRS is tracking your every move and your every asset worldwide. That's just some guy complaining about his country. No, it's pretty intense. It's different. And I think that's kind of misunderstood. So do I think these tiny island programs are going to become an issue? I do have some Westerners who look at them as kind of toy programs. And I think if you come from the U.S. in particular, you kind of look down on it, which I don't think is fair. I think that some of these entrepreneurs are hyper-focused on their return. If they get 16% yield and someone else is getting 16.1, they feel like a loser. And so imagine how much of a loser they feel like giving away $100,000. Even if it saves them $10 million, they feel like a loser, which I try and get people to put in perspective. But overall, I think the concern that a lot of these folks have is the U.S., already obviously has a big worldwide tax problem. I left the U.S. for that reason. I handed in one of the world's best travel documents to get away from their policies. And the EU might be next. So I think these small islands aren't a bad hedge. Now, do you want a landed country? Sure. But what I would say is, perhaps you have some kind of residence. I'm here in Malaysia. I rode through this in Malaysia, and I can tell you where I live in Malaysia, owning a home here, I had relative freedom compared to a lot of folks. And so the fact that I'm not going to St. Lucia, where I'm a citizen, I think is irrelevant, right? I was here, and I could get here, and I think that you want to have, more than just one passport. I think that just, going out and getting a St. Lucian citizenship and then going back and sitting on the couch and not changing anything else and not having any other plans is probably not going to be sustainable. But I can tell you, you wanted a Brazilian citizenship? You want, a U.S. citizenship? Those places are huge hot button places. So I think there's still some validity to these small countries. I think the issue is how do they market themselves? But I think to Westerners, they want places that are less involved in their life. They're tired of being dictated to. And I think smaller countries equal more freedom in many cases.
You mentioned the U.S. or the IRS, and which is one of, as far as I know, only two countries that tax your global income based on your citizenship. The other being military dictatorship, Eritrea.
Right.
You hinted that may lay in the cards also for the EU in the future, or European Union countries. Can you tell me what you base that fear on?
Well, it's my personal speculation. I look at where I think the world is going. Number one, you've got politicians who increasingly see a world that's competitive. People in the West don't like that. They don't like that a country like Malaysia, that I've often said 25 years ago, in your lifetime, in my lifetime, was a place you wouldn't live. Nobody was thinking about it. Nobody was talking about it. Look at Georgia, right? It's a little Trumpian, but you wouldn't even be talking about Georgia if it weren't for me 5 years ago. And who was talking about Georgia? I know people who were living in Georgia 15 years ago, and they said it's terrible. Saakashvili came in, who is our friend, President Saakashvili, turned the place around. And over the course of time, the culture grew. And now it may not be the number one place for people to live, but you could live there. And it's very comfortable. It's very safe. It's very open. And so, people in the West don't like that. And so what do? They send people to countries like Georgia to get the youth all fired up, thinking that if only they adopt the high tax, zero freedom, expensive cigarette, zero polluting bus policies of the EU, that Georgia will become Sweden. That's not how it rose from oblivion to become where it is today, and it's not how it's going to keep growing. And so I think that the politicians in these Western countries are seeing people like me hiring in the Serbias, the Armenias, the Georgias, the wherevers, and they don't like it because people's wages aren't growing. And so there's an increasing thing of tax the rich. And so when I read policy papers from the OECD and other organizations, and I read about how they want a digital tax, they wanted to have taxes on services globally, I look at more countries looking at having withholding taxes for moving money overseas, I start to read the tea leaves and say, what is so difficult about saying, hey, if you're going to have the privilege of being European, that's fine. And you can go live wherever you want. But if you choose to live in Dubai, or you choose to live in Vanuatu or in Monaco, it's our values. That's what the politicians always say. It's always the values, right? It's our values that people don't pay nothing. You have to contribute. And, just look at our content. Look at my content. There's always people who stumble on it, who aren't really interested. They just want to complain and shame and blame. And that's their thing. You don't want to contribute. Well, excuse me, if you live in a place where they don't want you to contribute, they say, here are the rules, you follow the rules, nothing wrong with that. But these people are increasing in numbers, and now they're getting support from folks in Canada. I think it's only a matter of time before some countries start to float this.
That's very scary indeed, and it could very well be the future path for us. I want to ask you about how you think that the programs, the citizenship by investment programs, the residency by investment programs, how do you think that they will respond to the pandemic? Obviously, they have been affected very differently. A place like Portugal, for example, has come away mostly unscathed from the pandemic. They've had, of course, a short-term dip in applications, but that's more of a logistical issue. Same thing with Greece, same thing in Spain. But what about the smaller country CIPs that now are they've been hit with a double whammy of, first of all, we haven't been able to, well, they've been able to process applications, but there's been a slight reduction in demand for citizenship by investments in a lot of these countries. That's number one. Number two is tourism revenue is way down for the foreseeable future. They've already lowered their prices to, it's like a psychological price floor of $100,000, I think. So there's not really any margin on the price front. How do you think that these programs will react to try to recoup some of these losses?
Well, I think we've seen how they've reacted, where they start kind of cutting around the edges at things that were perhaps higher margin in the first place. So, in St. Lucia, the bond reduction program, if you run the math on that, if you can make more than about 5.5% on your money, and you assume that there's no risk of default, then it's a decent deal with the spread between the 30 grand and the donation, the processing fee and the donation. I imagine a lot of people think they can make more than 5.5%, and that there is actually some beta in the bonds. So I think that perhaps you'll see something like that. I don't think that they need to lower prices, and I don't think that they generally will lower prices on the donations, at least on the single donations. I mean, if you look at the movement in new programs, Moldova came out when they had a program, and it was 100,000 euros. So that's a higher price point than dollars. Look at Montenegro and their program. It's kind of a hybrid, weird, approach. People have not been releasing cheaper options. And I don't think that they need to. And I think it's, as from a business point of view, I look at my business, if I reduced my retainer by 20%, would I get more clients? Probably not, right? I mean, the biggest amount to pay is $1. Most people never pay $1, right? So once you're paying $1, then you have, more price elasticity. So, I think you'll probably see some new programs eventually. I don't know how they're charging less money. I don't see that being an issue. I don't have the government affairs experience that a lot of these people do, but I just say to myself, what is the need to lower the price? I don't see a need.
You don't see it making a difference,
right? I don't see it making a difference. I mean, if you said, hey, you know what, St. Lucia, it's now $80,000, are people who are going, all right, for now you got me. I mean, is that really what's going to motivate them? I mean, there are people who it's like, why don't they pay me to do it? I mean, you're not going to convince those people for anything. I mean, so if you get it, you get it. It's it is what it is. I think that, especially, they've been increasing, visa-free travel for some of these countries to the kind of places that probably aren't going to use it against them, as the European Union or the UK might. So you have all these countries getting visa-free access to Russia. Getting visa-free access to smaller countries in Europe, et cetera. And I'll tell you this, right, as to the demand, I got my own brain trust of sorts together when this all broke out, and the consensus was, even if you see a dip, which you probably shouldn't in our business, it'll come roaring back when everyone gets back on track. I think that demand would pent up. Now, we've actually, had 3 record months in a row through all this. And so I think that it's continuing to grow. But I think that for where places where it's slowed down, I think you will see some pent-up demand, because I think it's just a matter of, I mean, remember like in late March when everything was just collapsing? I think it was like March 23rd. Every currency was in the toilet. I mean, the Australian dollar. I mean, all these different currencies were at 20-year lows. The stock market was falling. I mean, everything was in bad shape, and people were scared. And now, as much as people like to say buy low, sell high, that's not how they actually operate. And so now that things are back to normal, I think that they're kind of adding this, all right, I need some protection now more than ever. And they're going to do it, and that demand will be pent up, but I don't think that you're going to need to. And by the way, that's what I'm seeing in real estate markets all around the world, in the organic real estate markets, not in the immigration-fueled real estate markets, but in the organic real estate markets, I'm seeing a lot of sellers take their inventory off the market or just refuse to lower prices, figuring it'll come back.
Very interesting. So there is something to be said also as Doug Casey, I think he coined the term, buy when there's blood in the streets.
Sure.
You see a lot of that?
I don't think enough people do that. I think that's why people like Doug Casey can be very successful. I have bought more. I haven't gone crazy on a buying spree, partially because in the last couple of months I just haven't found that many things that were interesting to me. People were not lowering their prices enough. I mean, I'm here in Asia. I finally found a place that I'm buying in Asia. It's a foreclosure. And it took a bank to be like, all right, we know the market is a little soft right now because people can't come. No local sellers wanted to take a discount. I mean, as you know, in Asia, real estate is like the bank, basically, and it never goes down. And so why would they sell it after it's gone down? So, I just think that it's a good concept. I think it's a thing that a lot of people say, but what people say is not necessarily what they do. People also say, I'll leave when it gets bad enough. I've been hearing this since I was a child. If the United States ever gets bad enough, believe me, I'll be first in line to leave. Okay, look at what's happened in the last 25 years and tell me if you looked at that objectively, if you wouldn't have packed your bags by now. I mean, people say a lot of things.
Yeah, it's that whole slow boil effect, right? Where you don't really notice until the water's already boiling.
I'll also speak for myself, right? I mean, for me and for entrepreneurs, why are you an entrepreneur, right? You want to be successful. You want to prove yourself. Perhaps you have a little bit of an ego, right? And so it's nice to go ahead and say these things like, I'm buying with there's blood in the streets. Are you really?
Another thing that I think is a lesson that we have drawn from history in the investment migration industry is that these crises, whether they be financial crises or sovereign debt crises, have a tendency to either spur on or give birth to new investment migration programs. So we saw it in the Caribbean after the global financial crisis in '08. Those programs really started to, in earnest, standardize their programs, market them internationally, putting a lot of effort into that. We're very successful in doing that. Then a few years later, in 2012, 13, 14, when you had a sovereign debt crisis in the Mediterranean European countries, again, you had the birth of a variety of golden visa programs. And it's all born out of a necessity for the government to raise unencumbered capital, and they can't really raise taxes anymore, and their borrowing costs get prohibitively high. And so they say, okay, let's try investment migration and get foreign direct investment with no strings attached. Do you think that this time around, with maybe if there's a further fallout, economic fallout from the pandemic, that we'll see a variety of countries that previously maybe had dismissed the idea of having their own investment migration program will start to now look at it and reconsider it?
What I always say about I talk about go where you're treated best, right? Those are the 5 magic words. Go where you're treated best. And what, for me, that boils down to is culture. Local culture, government culture, they somewhat go hand in hand. I mean, look at Hungary. They had a bond investment program. And I had a couple people who were agents for the bond program back in 2015 or so, I think, 2016 maybe, telling me, we wouldn't rule it out that they just decide, we're just going to keep your bond money and we'll throw you some scraps and maybe we'll give you permanent residence faster or something like that. They eventually, get out of the business of doing that. Hungary did. They're saying, oh, we achieved all of our objectives financially. No, you didn't. You just don't like foreigners. And so if you're a country that is like the United States or a big Western country that doesn't have to do it, you probably have some kind of program like EB-5, and you have something that's kind of a roundabout way of getting in. I think that countries that are open to foreign investment, open to foreigners, will do it. And I think that's very political. And I think that that's the element that perhaps isn't talked about enough here. I mean, just because a country needs the money doesn't mean that they will. I mean, I looked at Georgia. They raised the requirements for permanent residence to make it more expensive than Greece, and they didn't even approve everybody. It became a little bit out of hand. And, do you think that, permanent residence in Georgia is more valuable than permanent residence in Greece? I love Georgia, would rather invest there, better deal, lower taxes, better everything. But on the worldwide market, you're basically saying, we're not really that interested. So I think that you may see some countries, you report on this. St. Vincent, for a couple of years ago, they were one person in Parliament away from putting it in play. I think you'll probably see some, but I really think that the culture, has a big impact on that.
Sure. All right. So, in the interest of brevity, I'm going to ask you a final question. Now, it's a little bit of a curveball because I didn't put it in the notes I sent you beforehand. But when I was a teenager, I read a book by Harry Brown called "How to Find Freedom in an Unfree World,"
Yeah.
and in many ways, it became. I only realized it later, but it's actually the foundation of a lot of the things that I believe today, and is the cause for a lot of the major life decisions I've made. And so I wanted to ask you, can you give us three main recommendations, that things you need to do to remain free in an unfree world?
Well, I think the main one, if you let things flow from this main one thing, is position yourself in a place, whether it's physically, financially, with your business, where those things are respected. And I think that's the issue. I ran into a situation recently. We had a bank that we were dealing with, and we were trying to move the account from one part of the structure to the other. And there was just so much corporate BS, so much nonsense, and eventually they just came back and they're like, we don't want to do this, just keep the other account. And I said to myself, we don't really want to do that. It's making things difficult in the corporate structure, whatever. Long story, but I said, I don't even want to deal with these people. And what I had to change was the idea that I need these people. And in reality, actually, it was better for our business just to get rid of them entirely and get away from that part of our business. And yet we had built up in our minds that we can't work without these people. And I think that's the way a lot of people think, is they tolerate things. They tolerate being treated poorly. They tolerate being condescended to. They tolerate being shamed. They tolerate a lot of things. And I think if you're an entrepreneur, if you're a nomad capitalist, if you're successful, most people aren't going to understand that. And so, I get interviewed by, I think the St. Lucia Star about, how can citizenship by investment programs be more palatable to people? And how can they be more palatable to the masses, I said, don't worry, don't bother. Most people don't get it. Most people are jealous that you have $100,000 to spend on that. And so, I just think that if you keep that in mind and you do go where you're treated best in every way, and you kill the sacred cows, that's the one thing that you need. I don't talk enough about it probably, but for me, I talk too much for some people about it, but for me, the mindset and the psychology of this is really the most important. It's like personal finance. It's not what you know. It's like dieting. It's not what you know. It's 80% behavior. Are you dieting and exercising? Are you spending more than you make? You're not going to get wealthy. You're not going to lose weight if you do those things. And so I think it's a mindset issue. I don't think that it's like some strategy. The strategy is irrelevant. Have a second passport. Don't live in a bloated Western country. Keep your tax rate low so that you're not wasting your money. I happen to think that from a personal level, lower your taxes, give some money away, find causes that you like and support them. Don't hoard it all. Take a small bit of what you're saving from 40% taxation, find some causes that you think are worthy. You'll feel better and you'll help things that are important to you. And I think that'll give you personal freedom. So to me, it's all a mind map of Are you tolerating things? And from there, the strategies fall into place. How can Nomad Capitalist help you? 4 ways. Number 1, subscribe to our channel and click the notification bell to make sure you get our new video every day. Number 2, get a copy of Nomad Capitalist, the book. You'll learn a lot of my personal experiences over a dozen years of studying this stuff, as well as exactly some of the strategies that you can use to build your Nomad Capitalist plan. Number 3, if you're not sure where to start, but you want to come and learn from my team and I, you want to come and mingle with like-minded people, learn more about our live conference, Nomad Capitalist Live. It's coming up soon. And number 4, if you want some help right now because you've got a burning issue, you need something solved, you want to lower your taxes, get a second passport, or build the Nomad Capitalist lifestyle of your dreams, go to nomadcapitalist.com and click on Become a Client.